Welcome in, Bears fans, for another episode of Bare Bones to IR. I'm back again. As always, I am Dr. Mason West, and today we have a special guest, Windy City Gridiron's own Robert Schmitz. Robert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself? I see you've got that homage shirt that they sent a couple of us. That is sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, I was pumped. Lesser, right, just hit us up, said, hey, go on the site, pick a shirt, and I had to go with the Blitz Walter
Have to.
Payton.
Have to.
And it's fun. This is why it's so cool that I got to hook up with y'all and be a part of this. There's just a fun community, and it's just
Right.
awesome to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. It's sweet, man. And I'm so excited that you're having me on for this one because I feel like, honestly, both Bears fans and the rest of the NFC North, we could use a level set on just going through position by position, talking through which team has the most quality groups. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of in the doldrums of the season right now where like we got a little taste OTAs, but you go on Twitter and Bears fans are freaking out about Roshan getting, like the fourth read on a pass, catching it, and then getting touched by three defenders. I'm excited too. I really am. But we definitely need to take a step back and say, all right, where is this roster? And then also where is it in compared to the NFC North?
Right. I can't wait. You ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's just hop right in. So this is my poor man's attempt at trying to make a graphic that we're going to use in order for those watching to be able to see where we're putting some of these players. And essentially, really what we're looking at is our cocoa meter, one could say, our confidence concern. I didn't give Robert really any guidance on this. It's what he can use whatever parameters he wants. I can use whatever parameters I want so that we can go position by position and say which ones we're concerned about and which ones we are confident in. So why don't we start at the bottom, Robert? Which position are you, we'd say, the most concerned about for this Bears team?
For the Bears, defensive line. I mean, to me, purely because, I always feel weird about the word concern, not to over talk Mason, because it's like, do I have high expectations for this defensive line group? Not really. Is there much that a very young and frankly empty edge core can do to disappoint me? No, because my expectations, Mason, are in the ground. But they're going to be the worst unit on the team, or at least they should be, right? Because they just don't have the investment that other groups have. Wide receiver, you've got some first and second round picks, if you got, depending on how you score DJ Moore. Quarterback speaks for itself. We got a first rounder in there. DB, a lot of second round picks and one of the best safeties in the NFL. Linebacker, a lot of money, but defensive line, we're just not there yet, right? And so I feel like that's my last one. But what about yours?
You know what? Why don't we just make it even? I got the exact same thing. I got D-line at the bottom for pretty much all the reasons you just said. There just hasn't been a lot of investment in it, and the investment they have made, they're rookies. We don't know ultimately what that's going to look like. Could they be awesome? Yes. The one thing we did put with this is we are looking at this over about 3 years for the most part. So it didn't say at the top. However, we simply don't know. And because of that, I had to put D-line that low.
I think we'll feel a lot better about it in the future. I mean, the best way to put this, right, is EJ Snyder on one of the Bears banters from like a year ago used the analogy that Ryan Poles is going through. He's rebuilding the house room by room. And he just hasn't gotten to the edge rusher room yet. And because you didn't split them out, that means defensive line has to tank in total. Because, I mean, Mason, you've seen this, for crying out loud. You have way too much experience with, like, the actual athletes themselves not to see that edge rusher is a position run by first-round picks. Like, if you don't have a first-round pick on your line, you're behind in the arms race. In fact, a lot of lines have two. The Bears right now, they've got, a $7.5 million man in DeMarcus Walker, and his best trait might be that he kicks inside on pass rush downs. So, hey, it's fine. It's fine, right? They haven't built the room yet, but that just means they're last on the list for now. No harm, no foul, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, they added also Rasheem Green, same thing, just a guy that because you needed to fill out that room. Andrew Billings at nose tackle. Nose tackles don't get a lot of play unless you're one of the top two guys, but it's not like any Bears fans knew who an Andrew Billings was before he ended up on this team. And Justin Jones, he was better last year than I think a lot of people give him credit for, but he was basically the only guy on that line. Therefore, everyone expected the world of him, but he's a fine rotational piece. And then Travis Gibson has been a bit disappointing, right? As soon as they shipped off, a Robert Quinn, a Khalil Mack, all those things, Travis Gibson was really, again, just the guy on the edge, and teams were able to focus on him a little bit, and he just was not able to create on his own when he did get the one-on-one matchup. So this room needs a lot of help, and therefore it is sitting at number 9.
Absolutely. Now you have to start with number 8. You have to.
All right, I'll go with number 8, and for me, I had to go with, and this kind of sucks that this is the case, but I had to go with the opposite line, and I went with the offensive line.
Oh, tell me
My
about it.
my thought process when it came to the offensive line is, again, a lot of unknowns, but in a different kind of way. So, right, last year you start off with Lucas Patrick supposed to be your center. He gets hurt, and now all of a sudden he's kind of your guard, but not your guard because he kept coming in and out. When he finally did play center, I think it was about 5 snaps before he ended up
Mm-hmm.
having another injury. And so now you have Cody Whitehair sliding in at center, but he had his own problems. He was good. He was solid at center, but he had snapping problems. Is that something that continued? Can he stay healthy? Now you have Tevin Jenkins at left guard, who has not been able to stay healthy. You have a rookie that you're very excited about, but he's a rookie. You still don't know what he's going to give you. I know now you also have a 5th round pick at left tackle who is in a redraft, probably, I would say, going in the 1st round, just because he's one of the best left tackles in that draft from last year, which says a lot about him, but he is still a 5th round rookie. So,
Right.
Then you have Nate Davis, who is solid, and that's kind of where you stop. It's solid. So with all of that, for me, there are just too many question marks for me to be confident in this unit.
There's a lot of question marks, but because of Tevin Jenkins, I'm going to end up having the offensive line a little higher than maybe you will. I mean, and that's okay, because with Braxton coming along decently, adding Darnell Wright is a really big positive for this unit 3 years down the road. Because see, Mason, that's where your own rule is getting you, right? For me, number 8 is the tight ends, because I'm going to sound like a massive hater. I know Cole Kmet's going to get an extension. I don't have a tight end on this team that I want in 2 years. Every time I watch, okay, let me ask you this, Mason. When you think Cole Kmet, what do you think his edge is? Is it that he's a good pass catcher? Is it that he's a good blocker? Like, if you were going to call a play to feature Cole Kmet, what type of play is it?
It's going to be a seam route so that he can use his size and pass catching ability.
I'm here with that. I think that makes sense. And there's 10 tight ends that just got drafted in this draft alone that can run an equivalent seam route, and even worse, in my opinion. Now, this might be because I watched too much of the film, but Mason, they called a lot of plays this last year where Cole Kmet was the primary read, and he won on a shockingly low percentage of them, which is fine. It's okay, right? It just means to me, if Cole Kmet is your primary pass catching tight end, that you need another one, which is part of why they brought in Robert Tonyan. And I don't know if he's a consistent enough blocker, but this is my gripe and it's my cross to bear, and that's okay. I've got tight end at number 8, and that's all right. I would love to see the Bears add a tight end to the room next year. I think they had a couple opportunities to do it this year, but I don't disagree with a single one of their selections based on the positions that they got all the way through the 5th round.
Yeah, it was really interesting because leading up to this year's draft, you heard all these individuals saying Bears really need to get a tight end because it's such a deep class, which I think it was very true, right? You were able to get some really quality tight ends in 3rd, 4th rounds. I think if you go back to what I've said, whether it's on this podcast, Twitter, etc., you could say a Cole Kmet defender, and I just always will be. You saw the difference between what he could do when in the Nagy era, when the offense was just putrid and you couldn't get in the red zone, to now all of a sudden with Eberflus and with Getsy, and when you actually were able to get into the red zone and what he could do for you. And that was also when the receivers were terrible last year. Let's just be real, especially when Mooney went down. You now are stuck with pretty much your main receiving threat. If I'm on the opposite side of the ball, I'm probably looking at Kmet like, all right, let's just take him away, because I'm not scared of Dante Pettis. I'm not scared of Equinemius beating us. So I'm really curious this year what it's going to look like when you do have this better receiver core, what Kmet can do with maybe a little less attention. But I can definitely see why you put them down at 8. For me, I raised them up because of Robert Tonyan, who you alluded to earlier, but I can talk about him a little bit more when we get there. Who did you have at 7?
So if I'm taking a look, suddenly we hit a bunch of rooms that are pretty solid overall. There's a lot of questions at corner right now, where this is a very high upside room, but you talked about confidence concern. To me, I'm going to weight the more question marks you have, the lower they're going to end up being. So while this room could end up, put corner at 7, Mason, that's where I'm going with this. Okay. While corner could be upwards of the 3rd best positional room on this team at the end of the year, Mason, or within 3 years. Right now, we don't know if Kyler Gordon is going to get the hang of nickel. We saw some flashes that he started to develop at the at the end of the year, but we don't know. A rookie corner like Tyreek Stevenson, no matter how much I love him, and I do, is always a question mark. And is Jalen Johnson going to be with this team in 3 years? We don't know. And you always need a corner one. If you don't have one, that's a big question. This is just a high variance room, right? And I feel like the offensive line, who I'm going to end up having at 6, spoiler alert, it has just a little more meat that I can count on because they've got a lot of depth. Whereas with corner, considering that your depth, like your proven depth, is Jalen Jones and Kendall Vildor, I'm going to put him at 7 and hope for the best. But in the confidence concern question, right? Corner's a room that I feel good about within 3 years, but it's, I don't know. I may have gotten my own scale wrong. You tell me who you've got at 7.
It's funny. We did this totally separately, right? Like I said, Robert, rank these in terms
Right.
of, again, confidence concern, and 3 years, that was it. But we have the same team at 7. I also have corner. I don't think I need to heavily go into it. It's the exact same reasons you said. Tyreek Stevenson, excited about what's he going to look like as a professional. Like you said, Kyler Gordon. One thing that was kind of cool. They talked about how Kyler Gordon, even though Jalen's not at camp right now, they didn't slide him out during some of these. It's OTAs. Take it for what you will.
I love it.
But they didn't slide him out. They said, no, you are a nickel. And as we saw at the end of last year, he definitely did better when he got to focus on one position, specifically in the slot. So that's great, but can he continue that? And so on and so forth, everything you said. Again, over the course of 3 years, I'm excited. I like Terrell Smith. I think he has a really good chance to potentially be a starter in this league. However, again, that's a big question mark. He's some insurance for Jalen Johnson, but you can't put anything down in ink with that. So for this exact same reason, I had cornerback at 7. But for me, for my number 6, I had safety.
Tell me about it.
And for that, for a while, right, you saw Eddie Jackson struggling. And as we heard, there was some stuff behind the scenes going on that may have led to that. But at the same time, we can't ignore those struggles entirely. He had a huge bounce back year last year, and then he gets hurt, and he suffered an injury that is not super easy to come back from. But from what I understand, he should be back by the veteran mandatory camp. So don't worry about that too much. However, you still have to be concerned about that as a whole. He's getting up there. He's being paid a lot. What's next year? What's the year after that? You have Jaquan Brisker. Very excited about him, but he did have his issues. He's a rookie. Keep that in mind. Not taking anything away from the guy, but at the same time, it wasn't like he went out there and you were like, all right, he is the dude or anything of that nature, especially for your second round pick. So he still has some stuff to prove as well. If you have one of them go down, what's next? That's kind of where my next thought was. You do have an Elijah Hicks. We know pretty much nothing about him besides he did push-ups after he got drafted. Kendall Williamson is a late round pick, so you're not going to bank on that. You don't have your DeAndre Houston-Carson safety blanket right now, so who knows? So at that rate, this year's question marks, next year's question marks, et cetera, et cetera. That's why for me, it's number 6.
That's a bunch of great points. And if I didn't think that Eddie Jackson is just a player that I have a massive soft spot for. I mean, at this point, I worry that I'm becoming the president of the Eddie Jackson fan club, which anytime you're the highest on a specific player, I always feel worried, right? But especially because, like you're talking about, Mason, I have just ignored that he's almost 30 and coming off of a very hard to come back from injury because I don't want to believe that Eddie Jackson's playing career is closing in on an end, right? But with that said, I mean, the offensive line, I had him at 6. And at the end of the day, I feel like safety, corner, and offensive line are all in the same tier, right? Where they've got serious upside. They've got decent investment, and things could go south in a hurry if X and Y gets hurt, right? If Eddie Jackson gets hurt again, this safety room is in trouble. But if Jaquan Brisker takes a step forward, I mean, say what you will, Mason, but Jaquan Brisker seems like he's emerging as a clear locker room leader. And if you're a locker room leader as a safety, it's hard to be really bad, right? Because safety is a position of intangibles. Now, we'll see. He certainly had his issues, but I struggle to believe the locker room rallying around him like they are very clearly. I mean, Tremaine Edmonds mentioned him by name in his latest post camp presser. If he wasn't taking strides, and regardless of what role he ends up taking up in the defense, maybe he ends up a Landon Collins esque safety linebacker hybrid. Maybe he ends up part of the disguise rotations that they clearly wanted to do at the start of the year next year or last year. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. But at the very least, if he takes a step forward, the Bears have two very good starting safeties. I think one of the best safeties in the division, Kirby Joseph, included in that conversation. But that's all a question of how healthy number 4 is, and it sounds like you know more than I do there.
Yeah, like I said, I think he's going to be back by a veteran minicamp. I don't think that's a huge concern. It's not as much about how he starts the year; it's does he finish the
How he
year?
finishes it.
And then again, we like we're saying, this is a 3-year question. So what is that in years 2 and 3? Safety is not something that you necessarily have to put
Making
a
a good
ton of
argument.
early investment in and all that stuff. But it's you still wonder. Who
You're
do you have
making a
number 5?
really good argument, Mason. You're making me feel like I need to bump offensive line up and put safety at 6.
But who do you have at number 5?
Number 5, I would put safety here
All right, yeah.
because they're all in that category, right? It's really great, by the way, that we haven't had the list wide receiver here. If we did
yeah,
this
right.
over the last bunch of years, like wide receiver would be in the bottom half, if not the bottom couple positions for a bunch of years running, even when we had Allen Robinson. So it's nice to see that we're both at least, I don't know where the wide receiver can end up, but we've talked about safety a lot. Who do you have at 5?
So 5 is where I had tight end come into play. And I think for me, it was because of the acquisition of Robert Tonyan. He is just, when he was healthy, so he did have that ACL tear. Keep that in mind. But when he was healthy, he was a touchdown machine. He was, the perfect inside the 20 guy. And that's, I think, something that he can kind of make up a little bit for the Cole Kmet situation. Is he a top 5 tight end? Are either of them top 5 tight ends? No, not if you're going to list them all out. However, I just like the complementariness of that. I think it harkens back to what Justin does really well, which is, that intermediate to deep ball. And so I think it's going to play off really well. The main reason that I also put them there is because, yes, Tanyan's got some injury concerns. Cole Kmet's never had really any injury concerns. So he's been out there. He's been solid. He shows up when he needs to. He gets in the way for blocking. At least he does that. He's not exactly top tier blocker, but that's also not what they necessarily ask him to do heavily.
Totally. I mean, that's the thing, right? I feel like let's put it this way, because I feel like this is important. There are some people that they want to see a football player, and in particular, a tight end, become a weapon, become something that you can have I want a DJ Moore that can be the tip of the spear on certain passing plays and can become a deadly secondary weapon on others, where maybe the slot receiver is working the primary route, and then you've got DJ Moore on the backside, right? Getting wide open. So if your slot receiver doesn't wiggle free, he does. With Cole Kmet, the problem, his best trait is that he's not horrible at anything. His worst trait is that I would say he's not particularly good at anything either. And so depending on where you land, you may end up really despising the guy. I don't hate him personally, but there are some things that he does really well. When he gets extended, I don't know what his market's going to be. And so if somebody hands him an 8-figure per year contract, I'm not really going to understand it, but that's okay. I've seen Dawson Knox get paid, and if Dawson Knox can get paid, I can understand somebody paying Cole Kmet. And to his credit, Mason, in the future, all we're hoping Kmet has to do is become somebody that can become lost in the defensive shuffle, right? Where, in very literal terms, if they forget about Cole Kmet and he has another game like he had against, was it Miami, Mason, where he had 2 touchdowns and neither of them looked difficult at all? Like he caught a flat route and ran it 20 yards, and then he caught one of those check and release routes where he blocked a little bit, got out and caught the ball uncontested. Sure, man, do what you do. Not every touchdown or not every tight end has to be Travis Kelce, and that's okay, right? Now, I got a hot take for you at 4. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep, let's do it.
I don't think it's fair to list Justin Fields any higher than this. The quarterback room is exciting, incredibly exciting, but also Justin Fields has anticipation questions that he's got to answer that we're high on. We're Bears fans. We like the guy. His talent is obvious, Mason. But also, we just threw for less than 150 yards a game with a horrible offensive line and a horrible set of receivers Absolutely. But there are some pieces to Justin Fields' game from a pure quarterbacking perspective that I think we need to see answers to those questions. And I mean, Mason, if we redid this list in week 3, we could end up having quarterback at 1. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. And that's why I always have to reiterate, we're doing this in the middle of OTAs. So there's
Right.
still, for the most part, this is the roster, but an edge could be added. This person could get cut, that person could get added. And in addition to that, we haven't seen them play any real football. So like
And
you're saying, week 3, this could look so different.
And it doesn't help anything that when you compare it to other rooms, I mean, Mason, this is one guy, right? Like,
Right.
could we include PJ Walker? Maybe, but in the world of like, let's rank the room in confidence and concern, this is all focused on one guy. So with receiver, maybe you're not the biggest Claypool stand, but you love Darnell Mooney, DJ Moore, you like Tyler Scott. You know what I'm saying? You could build this case where you're like, well, you can't hate the room that much. With Justin Fields, was just enough of a question. And that question plays out like there's a question mark around the only guy in the room. And I love him. You love him. We're all high on Justin Fields' potential, but this is a season where we've got to see just a little bit of results. I think 4 is very fair for him.
I'm going to put my 3 and my 4 because I kept flip flopping these two,
Got to
and
do it.
because they tie together. I had QB at 3 and wide receiver at 4. And
Nice.
it was hard because kind of like we just talked about, like how the
Mhm.
wide receiver room does will also partially dictate how Justin does. But at the same time, if Justin takes a step, that'll dictate how the wide receivers potentially do, because can he elevate them? And I kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think what ultimately for me got me to move quarterback up to 3 was, and funny you talked about PJ Walker, 2 things. One,
There you
if
go.
if Justin gets hurt, I'm more confident in PJ Walker coming in and keeping the Bears afloat for a week or 2 than
Mhm.
any of the previous really backup quarterbacks the Bears have had, especially because he did actually decent with DJ Moore and the Panthers last year. But more importantly is I think the quarterback room's floor is ultimately elevated because of Justin as a runner.
Yes.
Now, that's not how you want to win. Ultimately, you want to get away from that. But if there's some struggles early, if a Mooney's a little slower to come back, things of that nature, now all of a sudden Justin can use his legs to get you a little higher. Whereas in the wide receiver
100%.
room, where's Mooney going to be? I think he's back in training camp, from what I'm understanding with his injuries and all that stuff. So I don't think he's missing any weeks of the season. I think he's going to be ready to go, training camp, boom, boom. And it's awesome that you're hearing what Justin is saying about Chase Claypool, right? On his
Yes.
own, bringing up Chase's taking a step and making the right decisions and all that jazz. But as a fan, you're sitting there thinking, but is he? You still have to wonder. It's still a question. You still have a question about Chase. Can he do more? You still have a question about Darnell in terms of what's the ankle going to look like. After the
Right.
top 3, it kind of falls off. What Velus Jones is your gadget for some reason, gets 20 yards every time he touches the ball, but he's not really getting the ball all that often.
Right.
Equanimeous St. Brown's a blocker. He's not really either pass, so on and so forth. So for me, that's why I had wide receiver at 4, quarterback at 3.
Oh, I completely understand. The whole main reason I know I feel decent about the wide receiver room is because I think DJ Moore is one of the most critical players in the NFL right now. I mean, I understand that there are a bunch of people on Twitter, because I saw this the other day, where they want to suggest that somehow DJ Moore to Chicago is not the same as Stephon Diggs to Buffalo or some of the other wide receiver trades like Tyreek Hill to Miami. I think that's hogwash. I mean, like, it's not to say, Mason, that I think from a yards or production perspective that Justin Fields absolutely will suddenly stuff 1,400 yards into DJ Moore's statistics over the next 7 games. I hope so. I bet you hope so. We don't know. But in terms of the on-field football like aspect, DJ Moore is a third down nightmare. DJ Moore is not the guy you want on the backside of your formation. DJ Moore is somebody you can call plays for. You can have him mixed into a play. He completely opens up your playbook. Your receiver room suddenly, Mason, becomes a strength from being a liability and skips the part where you are winning with those receivers, because Darnell Mooney as a number 2 is a very good number 2 wide receiver, even if he's just an all right wide receiver 1. And then say what you will, Mason, like Chase Claypool had his issues last year. There are certainly questions about how he's going to mesh with the rest of the locker room. Like, I'll just let this rant say that wide receiver to me is my number 2 position here, because once you bump all these guys down your group, I feel like suddenly there's a lot to be confident in. And Velus Jones is definitely a gadget guy, and EQ, I hate saying this, right? EQ might be wide receiver 4 on the current depth chart. But come week 10, when somebody gets hurt, Tyler Scott may have played himself into a little bit of a role. Velus Jones may have a better understanding of the playbook, and EQ, while really bad as a wide receiver 2, isn't a horrible emergency wide receiver 3, especially because of the blocking versatility. I think it's a room that can handle an injury or two and still churn out decent production. That's more than a lot of the units on the team can say. Though number 3 for me is running back. And it's not because I hate Roschon Johnson. It's because I don't know if this room has the star player that the 2 rooms above it does. And I know that reflects on Justin Fields a certain way, but I love Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert is a phenomenal runner that reminds me a lot of Nick Chubb, in the sense that Chubb is little bit of a liability on passing downs, both as a blocker and as a pass catcher, but doggone it, can he run the ball or what? Roschon Johnson, Travis Homer, and the rest of this room make me feel very good about the running back room, but I don't know if they're going to be difference makers per se, like the other 2 positions on the team are feeling. How do you feel about the running backs?
So, it's not a huge secret. There's only 2 spots left. And
Right.
I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit of a running back stan, but that's not the reason I have the running back room as number 1. The reason I have the running back room as number 1 is because Khalil Herbert across 2 separate years has shown that he can be an RB1 in terms of at least running production, right? 2 years ago, when everyone was saying that there was no chance the Bears could do anything against Tampa Bay, he put up the first, 100-yard game against the Buccaneers. They let up all year for running backs. He continued that the following year when Montgomery got hurt. I think at a bare minimum, you're going to be locked down as you are set. You're good to go in that running back room. I'm also someone, though, that has gone on record where I think by week 5, by week 6, you're going to have Roschon Johnson be your RB1. Right. I think that's because of his pass blocking ability. Let's say you're sitting at the line and you have a run play called, but you want to audible into a pass play because you want to give Justin a little more autonomy and be able to do stuff. You're more confident, I would think. We'll see that Roschon is back there because now he can pass block than a Khalil Herbert. And I think we're also going to see that he may not be quite as explosive, but Roschon's going to be consistent. And you see that across the league, right? Think about how long Zeke was the RB1, even though Pollard was more explosive.
Exactly.
And that just continues to happen. So your RB1, it depends on your definition of that. And so that's why I have running back as my number 1 there.
It's a diverse room. Especially considering that, like you're talking about, statistically speaking, Khalil Herbert is one of the most efficient runners in football and has been for a while. And with Justin Fields, I don't feel like enough people talk about how adjustments get made over the offseason that are really, really important, Mason. And so the guys that are going to have extra space in week 1 this next season are going to be the running backs, because teams are going to probably over focus on stopping Justin Fields' legs. Don't you think? Like, yes, of course, the wide receivers are going to have extra room, but that's obvious. Guys like Khalil Herbert, guys like Roschon Johnson, guys like Travis Homer that can punish you on carries where Justin Fields has an option tag and makes that plain and then gives the ball away to the running back, they're going to be able to potentially break a tackle in space and pick up 15 extra yards on what should have been just an 8-yard gain. And that's going to be mission critical for the Chicago offense.
Oh, 100%. And now, we go back to linebacker. So for me, linebacker's number 2, you linebacker's number 1. Nomad in the chat says, the linebacker group could be the most ferocious in this league. And I completely agree. When you ultimately look at who the Bears have now, TJ Edwards, who was with Philadelphia before, and you have Tremaine Edmonds, right, who's with the Bills. They complement each other, I think, so well. When you look at it like a TJ Edwards, he had 159 combined tackles last year, and that built on 130 the year before, 70 the year before that, and 30 the year before that. He kept getting better and better and better in terms of being just a run-stopping linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds struggling a little bit in the run, but just 6'5", gigantic human being, super athletic. He's going to take away the middle. He's going to drop back in coverage. Quarterbacks aren't going to be able to throw over him. We even saw that already. He picked off PJ Walker in the red zone. Again, OTAs, but whatever. But I think for me, why I have them as high as I do is those 2. And then you have a Sanborn, who you saw can be a very functional linebacker, either at Sam or let's say there's an injury, he can fill in, right? You have a Noah Sewell who struggled last year at Oregon. There was a defensive change and all that. But before that, he was a consensus first round pick by a lot of standards. So
Right.
I think you have some solid depth there too.
That's the thing for me. Like the Bears signed a little bit of verbal wordplay coming up. The Bears signed one of the best linebackers in the league, and then they also signed Tremaine Edmonds. I feel like TJ Edwards doesn't get talked about enough. That analytically speaking, Mason, he was one of the best coverage Mike linebackers in football. I imagine they're going to play him at will linebacker. I would be stunned if they did it the opposite way. And I know Tremaine Edmonds has said that he's playing Mike linebacker, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a moment, especially coming right off the back of the draft, where terminology could have gotten confused. Point is that with Edmonds at Mike linebacker and Edwards at will linebacker, you have two very good linebackers. You have Sanborn in reserve. You have a starting level Sam in Noah Sewell at a position that starts quickly in something like linebacker. So to me, this is a talented and deep linebacker room out of nowhere. And it didn't even cost a draft pick. You've got a star potential player in Edmonds, because he's so big and he's so athletic and he gives you so many things that 4-3 linebackers traditionally don't give you. Edwards, on the other hand, Mason, is outstanding. I mean, if you want to talk about a high floor player that also delivers high ceiling results, he is phenomenal. I agree with Nomad here. One of the best free agent signings in the league last year, especially when you look at dollar per, like, let's call it value added. So to me, the linebacker room is about as good as you can ask. It gives the Bears a real shot at a dangerous back seven, even if they may have to do a little bit of work to generate pass rush on passing downs. And especially, like, I imagine these linebackers are going to have to put their hat down in the run game. We'll see how that goes, but hopefully the Bears can get out of playing 8 in the box every game, because that would do them a lot of good.
I was really tempted to probably overthink myself and move linebacker down a little bit, only because the D line is so low on
Right.
this list for me. And knowing that, is that offensive line going to, for the other team, now going to be able to get up on your linebackers and they can't flow to the ball? But I didn't want to overthink it. They're good players. They're deep.
Right.
I don't want to mess with that. But I think Quentin had in the chat had a great question. In 2018, were you guys team Roquan or team Edmonds? I'm not going to lie. I was Quentin Nelson, and then he was gone, went to the Colts, and I was team Edmonds.
I was pretty anti-linebacker. I would have done just about anything to not draft a linebacker at number 8, because I'd seen too many linebackers go the way of Patrick Queen. I'm so glad that Roquan Smith ended up the way he did, because it feels to me, Mason, like Roquan Smith hit the league a little faster. On the other hand, the Bears basically let Buffalo, as I understand it, do all of Edmonds' development for us. And then after one good season in Buffalo, he hits the market because they can't afford him. The Bears throw a bag at him, and they basically draft a free agent, or I know he's a first agent or a free agent, but they basically draft a first-round pick that's ready-made in Tremaine Edmonds. And you have to imagine Eberflus was just over the moon. I mean, I know this isn't a draft free agency podcast, but the Bears added a piece that he wanted. And frankly, I think the positivity there is that it gave Eberflus and Poles the flexibility to focus on maybe more important positions. I love linebacker. I'm not saying it's not important, but it wouldn't have surprised me if they would have considered their options with a round 2, early round 3 linebacker had they not gotten a guy like Edmonds. But instead, Eberflus felt like that middle was shored up. They didn't need to worry about it, which I'm excited about.
So you weren't linebacker. Quentin Nelson's off the board. Who were you taking at 8?
I pretty much ended up stunned. I would have let somebody else in the room make the decision, right? Because we ran out of all the guys that I wanted. Like at that spot, I would have wanted to trade down. Nobody wanted to trade down. We were stuck, which is fine, right?
Because you start to look at who was taken after that. At 9 was Mike McGlinchey. Then you had Josh Rosen, Minka Fitzpatrick, Vita Vea, Deron Payne, Marcus Davenport, Colton Miller, then Tremaine Edmonds at 16. So, you start to look at some of the people that were going. Did it fit the defense at the time? Yada, yada, yada. It's a whole thing.
Absolutely. What's next?
All right, next is something I'm going to pull up if this would work with me. There we go. We're going to do a little ad read. I am beyond excited to announce our new sponsor, My Mighty Meals. Owner and founder Chris Davia puts the personal touch to healthy eating that most meal prep services are missing. I personally have been using his services for almost 3 years now, and I haven't looked back. My Mighty Meals are cooked fresh and delivered directly to your home or work weekly in the Chicagoland area. They taste great the day you get them, as well as the final day of your week as you anticipate your next delivery. Each meal is macro friendly and makes it incredibly easy to track. You can choose from standard meals that are under 500 calories or heftier ones that are between 500 and 750 calories. The meals rotate each week, so I personally never get bored. A few examples include Denver tater tot scramble, pineapple teriyaki burger, loaded mashed potato, barbecue pork with sweet potatoes and coleslaw. If you need something a little more specific or have dietary restrictions, you can customize your order or for just a little bit more cash. One of my favorite parts is that there isn't a subscription, so you don't get stuck with meals you don't need. Just skip a week, 2 weeks, or month if you need a break. You can find these meals at mymightymeals.com, or you can find him on Instagram at mymightymeals. Seriously, Chris Dalga is awesome. I would consider him a friend. It's like I've been doing this, like I said, for 3 years. If you struggle with figuring out what the heck to eat and you're in the Chicagoland area, you got to do this. It's just top notch.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
those look great.
Seriously, and they taste so good. I can't even, like, usually the whole meal prep services, they suck. These are awesome. All right, now we're going to move on to a more global thought process. We are going to look at the NFC North as a whole and kind of just rank where the Bears, where the rest of the NFC North falls position by position. One thing I wanted to highlight, we combined safeties and corners into just defensive back, and then we also combined wide receiver and tight ends, kind of just pass catcher as the thought process. And if you're watching this live, on the left side is going to be Robert's picks. On the right is going to be mine. If you're listening to the podcast, you might want to check us out live. We got some pretty cool graphics that I spent too much time on because I'm a nerd like that.
These look great. These really do.
So let's start.
Who's going first? Who has to go first?
Why don't we do, Robert, rank the offensive line?
Okay, good. I thought you were going to start me off at quarterback. And I
was no, we're going to save that one.
Okay, so looking at offensive lines, that every offensive line struggles with depth. I mean, they really do. And especially because you just don't have enough of these guys that are 300 to 330 pounds, can move, can walk with a Myles Garrett type, Aiden Hutchinson type, and can also move somebody in the run game. I feel like number one is a little obvious. It's the Lions, wouldn't you say?
I have the Lions. It should be staring people in the face.
Right. Like, thank goodness there. And then as far as the second best, I feel like that's Green Bay. Now, it could go a couple different directions. Man, their offensive line coaching is really good, though. I mean, they're so consistent. What do you have at number two?
Again, we didn't talk about this at all beforehand. I also have the Packers at number two.
Yep. Number three, I actually think Darnell Wright pick bumps the Bears up a lot. I'm putting a lot of faith in Tevin Jenkins. Actually, no, Mason, that's not fair. I'm putting a lot of faith in Cody Whitehair here, who I don't think is as bad as a lot of people are making him, because the Bears' patron saint at center, Lucas Patrick, is now a reserve center. So worst case scenario, you've got Patrick coming in and ideally performing the way that we hoped he would have last year, because all we really saw was a hurt version of Lucas Patrick. But within this, I feel like Tevin Jenkins, especially as a starting five, the Bears starting five just really isn't that bad, and it's strong in the interior where I think they need to be. Davis and Wright are carrying a lot of favor for me. Who do you have at three?
I want to emphasize, we did not do this together. I also have the Bears. And I'm going to dive into a little advanced statistics that I actually have from our good friend Quentin at Buckistats. He also has his own podcast, Shaving Points Podcast. Definitely go check that out. But, why don't you finish up? So in terms of why you put the Vikings there, and then I'll dive into kind of an overall talk on the line.
Well, the main thing that I looked at with the Vikings is that they've got some really solid players on their offensive line, but I know this has been a real struggling point for them, and they seem to catch a decent amount of bad luck. I mean, there's an aspect to this, Mason, that there's a couple of these guys I can't say that I'm like, nails on. Garrett Bradbury is somebody that I know had a poor season last year, and all I can go off is he had a poor season last year, whereas a Vikings fan may look around and say, well, his pedigree is pretty solid. He should turn it around. I don't know. They've obviously got Christian Darrisaw, so they've got the left tackle that we don't in terms of investment, but Brian O'Neill at right tackle's just all right. Ezra Cleveland, again, just all right. right? These are guys that did not help them. Let's put it this way: they did not help them beat the Giants, and I can imagine that I don't feel like they did enough to get dramatically better next year. Maybe they will be. Offensive line can be weird like that, but what do you think?
So, like I said, I had Q get me some stats because he's just the stat wizard, and I'm just a plebeian when it comes to that. I do the best I can, but it's PFF isn't everything, but I think they do a good job, especially offensive line. There's not a lot of good stats and things out there, so I tend to lean on them a little bit. When you look at overall PFF grades, actually Detroit and Minnesota were tied at 71.1 as for overall, and then you had Green Bay at 67.8 and Chicago actually at 69.7. But when you kind of dive in and you look at, and again, we're kind of looking at this over 3 years and what that's going to ultimately look like. I don't love where this offensive line is ultimately going. They don't have a lot of young guys in that pipeline. When you look at some of the Minnesota's pass blocking grades, it was down to 62.6, which is just bleh. Their sack percentage was 1.4%, which to me, I mean, sacks, I know a lot of people say it's a quarterback stat, but at the end of the day, like you got to block your guy. And ultimately for me, like when you look at some of those guys, like you said, from Minnesota, just not a lot of household names outside of the left tackle and just a bunch of guys versus,
Right.
and that's why I put the Bears ahead of them because you have that Darnold Wright potential, you have the Tevin Jenkins potential, you have some options over there at center. I don't think I need to explain the Lions one very much. I mean, the Lions are just they want to run the ball and then they'll pass after that, and their run blocking is just
Absolutely.
fantastic. So it's built for what they want it to be. And then Green Bay's got some question marks for sure. What's Bakhtiari going to ultimately be and look like? So that's why for me, they weren't like a number one, but also you have some solid people there. Like I like Elton Jenkins. I think he's really good. Zach Tom is just very versatile. The fact you have that's fantastic. John Runyon, again, just a solid guy. Josh Nyman is a really good swing tackle to have. So that's why for me, they were at number two.
To me, the biggest problem, especially once we get to the 3s and 4s, Mason, is that we're Bears experts. So we see a guy like Jatiri Carter getting late work at the end of the season and starting to or get some work in OTAs, and we think, oh well, there's a little bit of upside. And I don't know Chris Reed. I don't know Blake Brandel. Like I'm reading guys off of the middle of the Vikings depth chart. So I can't give them the same benefit of the doubt that I tend to give to my home team. So especially near the 3 and 4 position, I agree with you. I think that the Vikings in particular have too many positions that I think they have to replace within the 3-year scope. Whereas with the Bears, I would imagine, Mason, their legitimate hope is that they have 4 of the 5 offensive line positions on the roster right now that will start the 2026 season. Will that come to fruition? Who's to say? Right? In fact, probably not. You work too much in injuries. You and I both know that something catastrophic happens, unfortunately, at least once a season to somebody. Right. But the hope would be that the Bears offensive system can bring over similar offensive coaching that the Packers got, and that to somebody from whether it was last year's rookie class or UDFA or somebody steps up on the offensive line, whereas Minnesota's system does not seem to be yielding similarly favorable results in the trenches, right?
Plus, the Lions have Jermaine Ifedi too, so we can't knock that. That's another reason why they're number one as their
That's
backup
why
left
they're number one,
tackle. You're just set,
right?
but let's shift from the trenches to a little bit like it's a sexier position. We'll go to the pass catchers, wide receiver, tight end. I'll lead it off. I have the Vikings at number one. When you have TJ Hawkinson, who's a top 5 tight end, and you have one of the best, top 3 wide receivers in the league, it just makes everything easier. You have the easy button that you can just hit over and over again. And it blows my mind that Kirk Cousins keeps messing this up when you have the talent that you have around him in that regard. And no one else really currently has a guy that's like that. DJ Moore is good, but he isn't Justin Jefferson. Let's be real.
Right.
Amon-Ra St. Brown is good. He is not Justin Jefferson. And even KJ Osborne is a solid 3, or now is it 2, I guess. You got rid of an Adam Thielen, but let's be real, kind of dead weight at this point. This is where I'm going to start to maybe drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. I have the Bears at number 2.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just much higher on the combo of the 3. A DJ Moore, who's had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, a Darnell Mooney, who was your number 1, now in number 2, so almost like a 2-star, and then Chase Claypool, who had a really good rookie year and just fell off a little bit.
Who's at 3?
At number 3, I got to this is the Lions. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just think he's really solid. I like what they have also kind of built around. Khalif Raymond is solid. I just don't trust what the Packers are doing there. Romeo Dobbs was kind of just missing all of last year. Christian Watson had a rough start, and then he had some explosive plays, but they were very they weren't multiple. They weren't like a bunch of different ways that he caught the ball. It was like two or three different ways, and then that was pretty much it. And so I don't know ultimately what his ceiling is, and I also didn't love his drops. And so I don't know what the heck they're doing there. They drafted a bunch of tight ends, which could be good, but did they draft a bunch of tight ends because they didn't know who to take, or do they
Right.
truly believe both of the tight ends that they took are going to actually be good?
Right. I mean, it's a big question mark. And I'll tell you, I was about to make the argument because it's a Bears podcast, it's the offseason. We're here to have fun, right? I was about to make the argument off of depth that the Bears had the number one spot at receiver until we included tight
Mm.
ends. And that means it's Minnesota. Because I think TJ Hawkinson edges Cole Kmet enough to where Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison eclipse the Bears set. I think Osborne is fine, right? But to me, Osborne isn't somebody who's going to. If you ranked those three receivers, Osborne, it's Osborne, Addison, Jefferson versus the Bears' three receivers, Moore, Mooney, and Claypool. The Bears get like 2, 3, and 4 in the world of priority, and Osborne ends up at 6, Addison a close 5th, but
Yeah.
you include tight end, and Hawkinson's going to make a bigger dent to me than I think Kmet is. 3, I agree with you. We're right on pace with each other right now. With the Lions at 3, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a special dude. It doesn't help any. I can't include Gibbs in this, so forget that. Laporta is going to be nice for them to have. Jamo Williams, we'll see what he becomes, right? I mean, he's a weapon, heck of a weapon. And I like the Packers plan at receiver. I know you said that that we have to look 3 years down the road. I actually think the Packers plan here is really solid. I am going to penalize them because I don't like the Packers and because I think next year they're going to be pretty poor. Like they're so young, Mason. They are so young. This receiver core could be punishing in the future. You add another piece. I think Watson could easily turn into a 1,000-yard guy. I think Jaden Reed is a stud. He'll overtake Romeo Dobbs eventually. But next year, Mason, oh, it's not great. Especially considering how little rookie tight ends do consistently. Like I'm going to put him at 4 because if it's a tie, the Packers lose. So what position's next?
Next, I'll have you start off with the linebackers.
Linebackers.
So this is interesting because we also didn't talk about how we are going to differentiate like 3-4 versus 4-3. I mean, yes, technically, right? An outside linebacker is technically a linebacker, but like, are they though? So I'm interested to see how you went with this.
I'm going to stick with inside guys for linebacker because to me, the outside, or if you play on the defensive line, you play on the defensive line.
That's pretty much what I did.
I feel like there isn't an argument against the Bears having the best inside linebackers in the division right now. And I'm not trying to drink too much Bears Kool-Aid. If you want to talk upside, they've got a physical freak with a capital F in Tremaine Edmonds. And if you want to talk production, TJ Edwards was statistically and analytically one of the best linebackers in ball. And Jack Sanborn has everybody buzzing. And then you add a first-round pedigreed linebacker from 2021 playing in the system that made him what he was. Like, you don't even have to like Noah Sewell that much. The Bears they kind of are firing they're firing on all cylinders with linebacker right now. And I get it. Like, Campbell in Green Bay is solid, but the Vikings are separating from Eric Kendricks. Like, they're rebuilding at the position a little bit. I know the Lions, I'm going to have the Lions at 2. They've got the most upside with Jack Campbell, who I think is a beast, and Alex Anzalone, who's a perfectly solid free agent. But it doesn't help anything, Mason, that I won't speak to saying that I've got the expertise on a lot of these rooms that I have on the Bears specific rooms, and linebacker is a position where you really can have a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round pick that's just a star. And I don't know a lot of these guys like I know the positions on the Bears, whereas I've seen oh man, no, bump the Lions down. I forgot that the Packers have Quay Walker. The Packers are probably going to be number 2 on this group. which helps me out because the Vikings are going to be number 4. Did we match again?
Oh, not quite. We were real close though.
Okay.
Basically, so I had the Bears at number 1 for all the reasons you just talked about. I'm not gonna dive into that. Number 2, I did have the Lions.
Get them.
For
Get them.
me, like you talked about Jack Campbell, you talked about Anzalone's fine. I mean, he does a job that you're supposed to do as a linebacker. And then for me, like I love Rodriguez. I just think he's a guy that just he knows how to play the position. He gets tackles. Right now, he's more of a depth piece. He got pushed back now, more likely with Jack Campbell being brought in. But, that's just, they fit so well into what ultimately they need to do for that defense. And that's why I went with them there. For the Packers, for me, and this might have been a coordinator issue, but you have guys like a Quay Walker and a Devondre Campbell, and it just didn't work for some reason. It's just like that defense was just bleh. And again, I don't know if it was, a maturity thing for Quay Walker. I don't know if it was our coordinator, Joe Barry, if he just wasn't getting the job done. But for me, there was just a lot left on the table that their pedigree didn't necessarily match. And then you talked about the Vikings. There's just not a lot there, to be quite honest. I mean, if you take the outside linebackers and put them where they should be on the D line, which we'll talk about in a minute here, you have a Brian Asamoah who's fine, and you don't have your Hendricks anymore, so you just have a Jordan Hicks there. It's a weak position. It's not great.
I agree. The Vikings, to me, they just haven't invested in it. Right. And that's fine. That's fine. Honestly, linebacker, it's one of those positions where if you have the weakest linebackers in the division, that may not mean much. I mean, there's a lot of teams that made the playoffs, Mason, with some really horrible linebackers. I'm looking at you. What is it, New York? But it's a goofy one. Like sometimes linebackers will really be the straw that stirs the drink. Well, kind of. Or they'll look like it, like in Philadelphia this last year. But there's talent at every other position, investment in every other position. I feel like this is okay. I'm taking Green Bay's raw linebacker talent over their linebacker production for putting them at number 2, because I do think it's Barry's fault in a lot of ways. And Quay and Campbell, to me, are both really, really solid players. But I'm not taking Chicago off 1. We win that round. What's next?
We're going to go DBs. So we got safety and corner. I'll go first on this one. Number 1, I have the Lions. I like what they're doing there. Again, similar to the linebacker, like they just fit the defense of what they want to do. And then when you go ahead and you add the players that they did, I love CJ Gardner-Johnson. I think, and Tracy Walker, Kobe Joseph, are just going to be really solid. You go ahead and draft a Brian Branch where you did, which I think he fell further than he should have. So again, looking down the road a little bit, the Lions are just looking like they have a really solid secondary that's going to be pesky. That's going to be annoying. They're going to get interceptions. Number 2, I have the Packers. For me, it's kind of what you were saying, actually, when it came to the linebackers for them, where, they just didn't perform well, but the talent is there. Jair Alexander is just a good football player. Douglas came really strong a couple years ago. You no longer have Adrian Amos there, but Darnell Savage is a solid guy there. I don't know much about Rudy Ford. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend like I do. But for me, just when you have a top tier talent like a Jair Alexander, when you have someone that gets turnovers like a Rasul Douglas, that's what pushes it up for me. And then I have the Bears in that 3rd position because of the questions we talked about earlier when it's talking about what's Eddie Jackson going to come back like? Is he going to be here for the next 3 years? What's Tyreek Stevenson going to look like as a rookie? He's a rookie. How much are you going to get out of him? Jalen Johnson, is he getting an extension? Is he not getting an extension? Because if he doesn't get one, now you're looking at, Terrell Smith as your next guy. And then can Kyler Gordon keep building like he's been building? But at this point in time, a lot of question marks. And again, surprisingly enough, Vikings are just chilling at the bottom for me. There's just not, I hate Harrison Smith. I think he's not that good. I think he's also just a gross player. I'm not a fan of him. Lewis Sign, right? He had that terrible injury, so he's now a backup. And you just have a bunch of guys, Cameron Bynum, Akila Evans, Byron Murphy, just dudes. They're not like anyone you're writing home about.
Right. I feel like this DB room, the DB ranking that we've got right here is messy. Right. I'll take the Lions at number 1 for pretty much all the reasons you mentioned. But man, do I want to penalize them because I don't like the corners. Like, it's great that they've got two really good safeties. This is a corner-driven league. I love the position of safety. I think it's really, really good. Or like, I think it's really important. I think good defenses tend to find a Hufanga, tend to find a Hetty Jackson, tend to find guys that will make all of the plays in the world for you at safety. And the Lions have found a lot of those guys, but man, they're going to get beat up by some of the receivers in this division. Those Vikings Lions games could be really fun score fests if the Vikings can get their act together. 2 is where things get really weird, Mason, because there's a I can't list the Bears and the Packers as tied, can I? I think losing AJ
you got to make a
choice.
choice.
I know.
Make a decision.
Because the problem is, like, okay, so because we're talking 3 years in the future, even though I'm not that confident in the Bears room, as we saw last, like just a minute ago, I feel like the Bears are number 2 here.
Quentin agrees with you too.
Well, the argument I'm going to make is that I still think Eddie's got 1 to 2 years. Oh, I think he's got 1 year of being a potential DPOY because he's a cover 4 zone savant that can play a little bit of cover 2. Range isn't part of his physical toolkit, Mason. His mind tends to create his range, which to me gives him a so slightly longer shelf life than some other DBs. So with that, suddenly you're looking at an entire Bears secondary that is Eddie Jackson and second round picks. That's high investment. Could easily become high yield depending on what the Bears do with Jalen Johnson. I love Jair. Jair's the best player of those two groups between the Bears secondary and the Packers secondary, right? But all I keep hearing about is Darnell Savage is an underperformer. And so eventually I got to listen to Packers fans a little bit when they talk about how Eric Stokes has been a disappointment. They talk about how Darnell Savage has been a disappointment. Rasul Douglas is a good player, but without quality safeties, I think the room, again, neck and neck. But I'll give the edge to the team that hasn't lost our trust yet, right? As opposed to Packers fans that don't trust their own DBs and want improvement there. And then 4th is the Vikings. It's not even necessarily the Vikings' fault. They just keep taking gambles and flyers on guys like Booth and Scene that are hurt. And so Mason, you and I just don't have the ammo to say they're any better than 4th, right? Like if we were giving them letter grades, it's weirder because they're question marks as opposed to being outright bad. But everybody else has a better plan in place at defensive back. And I think that's great because personally, Mason, it feels to me like DB is becoming a battleground and an arms race across the league. As teams are adding more and more and more wide receivers, you need more and more and more talented defensive back. So it's good to see that the Vikings I have a lot of questions because I want to score against them. Don't you?
It's making me quite happy. We're going through this process. I like seeing that, the Vikings secondary kind of just is meh and they don't have a plan. That's really good for the future of the Bears, right? I mean, it just goes in that hand in hand.
And then Harrison Smith, to me, you mentioned him.
I hate him.
I hate him so much. Yeah, I hated him a lot more a couple years ago. At this point, I think he's a name and a number that is, I mean, how old is he? Now I have to fact check myself.
I don't know, 42.
Because he's 32. Is that what you said?
I said 42.
He's 34. Mason.
I was kidding with that number. Jeez, he's up
I
there.
was about to say that I feel like Harrison Smith is what Eddie Jackson will be in a couple of years, but Eddie's not there yet. And if memory serves, Harrison suffered, it's not the same injury, but an injury of similar severity not too long ago, right? So interesting to see just how, I mean, honestly, Mason, you say that, like, credit to him for being as effective as he is at 34 years old, and shows you that a safety with all kinds of experience can stick around for a little while. This is a feather in my Eddie Jackson cap because I'm a homer and I'm going to argue for him staying on the Bears until I'm dead. But for now, I don't think they're any better than 4th.
I think it just shows what happens when plans go awry, when you invest in safeties and they get hurt, or you don't have enough backup plans, and you just end up getting stuck with. I think they would have moved on from Harrison Smith at this point, but you can't. You have no one to move on to.
Mm-mm.
So how about let's do running back, and you can lead it off for us.
See, I appreciate you leaving defensive line for last because we keep getting to put the Bears as not last, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Running back is a funny one. Let's go bottom up. Like
Mhm.
it's the Vikings that are last again because they're going to cut Dalvin Cook, and that's going to leave them with Alexander Madison starting. So they just don't have any investment there. Maybe somebody blows our minds that we've never heard of. I mean, there was a day and age when Zach Stacy took over the league, and nobody saw that coming, right? Or Damian Pierce. I did not know Damian Pierce was about to run all over the league. But to me, the Bears are third. That's a good running back room. Like it's just that the Packers at number one, in my opinion, with AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones, I don't know how you do much better. Like they've got some other guys in their roster, and I know this because I've been watching a bunch of Jordan Love tape. Like they've got some guys that can run a little bit, but it's really the fact that they've got two of the best runners on their team, and then second close behind them is Jahmyr Gibbs, who only gets a knock because we haven't seen him play yet. I don't think it's fair to
Yeah.
rate him above a guy like Aaron Jones until we see him play. And then David Montgomery, who coincidentally is already hurt, which surprises me. I mean,
Yep.
he's Frankenstein. He'll come back from just about anything. But at the same time, I mean, Mason, we're Bears fans. We know how many nicks and bruises Montgomery has had over his career. Eventually, it's got to catch up with the body, right? I mean, that's actually me asking you. Eventually, it takes a toll, doesn't it?
It adds up, especially when you just follow the pathway, right? The knee bone's connected to the hip bone kind of thing. And when you start seeing lower extremity injuries stack, especially on the same side, it's not great. So, I love Monty. I wish him all the best. I did wish there was part of me that wanted him back if the deal was right. But, especially with the way that the Bears running back room sits now, I'm pretty happy with how it is. And I'm worried about what Montgomery's future in the next, just let's say 2 years
Right.
looks like.
This is another one of those. It's kind of like the corner thing where it's like the Bears are third. I don't think that's a insult to the Bears room. It's that the other two teams prioritized running back a lot. And so Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert could end up doing plenty of damage and still being, I don't know, the third in a confidence ranking. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, I'll go bottom up as well. Vikings,
Do
same
it.
exact reason. There's no reason to even really worry about them. I had the Lions at number three, unknown Jahmyr Gibbs. Plus, it was weird. I think he's gonna be used so much in the slot, but he's technically a running back, and it's a weird situation there. I have the Packers at two,
Do it,
and I
Mason.
have the Bears at one
Do it.
for the same reasons we did when I talked about the confidence meter. I love I'm like the conductor of the Khalil Herbert juice train. All aboard. I was very much on the give him more carries thought process, and I think Roshan is. I'm not going to go over it again. I already had this conversation. I just think that room as a whole is fantastic, and then a Travis Homer as a special teams guy, as a option out of the backfield as a pass catcher is just going to make it very dynamic. And again, we're talking about 3 years. What does Jones and Dillon look like across those 3 years? Right.
Right.
I mean, I don't really know what that's going to be. For all I know, Jones could fall off a cliff next year just because of the age and the number of carries he has to sustain, especially because I imagine they're not going to throw the ball over the yard with Jordan Love. I think they're going to lean on that run game. So what does that look like? So for me,
Right.
3 years, throwing the Bears up there, I just think when you put them all together, it's going to create this monster that's very hard to defend, especially when you factor in Justin Fields and what he's going to do in the run game and hopefully the pass game.
Right. I mean, it doesn't help anything, Mason, that like all these rooms in 3 years are going to look different,
Yeah.
right? Like they're going to be names that get drafted to all teams. Like in 3 years, to use a stupid example, like pivoting to, do you want to go to defensive line now?
Oh, yeah. Defensive line's actually, where I want to go next.
I had a feeling. Deep Bears are going to be last on this list, which to me is entirely because we don't know the names yet. Like the Bears very easily will add a first round pick to this room, maybe two over the next 3 years, but they haven't done it yet. Right. So it gets funny grading it just because, like you're saying, Mason, we're trying to keep future in mind, but saying the Bears will invest in this, therefore they're better than the Vikings just feels like a cheap shot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things where we already talked about it. You have Andrew Billings, quote unquote, and you have Justin Jones as your starters. You have a bunch of question marks in the line. You have no edge whatsoever. I mean, that's a big question mark. Everyone wants to sign, Yannick Ngakoue and da 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 da. Speaking of Yannick Ngakoue, I'm sick of hearing this. Either A, he doesn't want to sign right now because he doesn't want to do mini camps and OTAs, and that's fine. So hush until training camp. Or B, the guy that coached him, Eberflus, with the Colts, is like, I don't want him on my team. So either way, let's just squash this conversation until training camp, please.
Was he on the Colts? I mean, he was on the Colts no, because I think they missed each other, right?
They
Just
missed each
because.
other, but like I'm looking at some of the crossover and conversations with the Ballard and of this and
Oh
of
sure,
that.
oh sure.
But yeah, not
To
directly.
me, if we're going now, I'll keep going bottom up if you don't mind.
Yeah, go
I
for it.
feel like the Vikings are number 3. They've got enough tools to, like, with Zadarius Smith, with what's his name, Daniil Hunter. Obviously, they don't have the greatest defensive line on the planet. They've got Kairos Tonga currently starting, which I don't think is some huge positive. Decent nose tackle, I know, especially because he came from the heartland of Chicago here, but it's not a banner carry. It's not something that you're super stoked about that you've got a guy like Tonga starting for you, but they've got more juice than the Bears do. I don't know if this is going to be controversial. The Lions are second for me, and they had the most explosive edge
Wow.
rush room, but the Packers are loaded. Like, the main thing you got to remember is that we're talking about a defensive line that has Preston Smith. He's pretty solid, but they have Kenny Clark, I think one of the best 3-tech and interior defensive linemen in the division right now. And I think that position absolutely rules this league. Devontae Wyatt is a first-round pick I was absolutely in love with, and scary to see that he came to Green Bay. And then they add Lucas Van Ness to give them even more juice off the edge. I mean, call me somebody who's focusing more on pedigree than production. You can. It sounds like you may disagree, but I feel like the Packers are stacked and dripping with defensive line talent right now, to the point where they can't field everybody at the same time. And even worse, if they kick Van Ness inside and play him with Clark, Wyatt, well, I guess they'd probably play him at defensive end unless Clark, like, he can bounce around a little bit. Oh man, the Packers have some nightmare matchups. Whereas, Mason, I love Aiden Hutchinson. Like, in a contest of who's the best player, Aiden Hutchinson is the best defensive lineman in the division. And Houston came along really, really well for them, but their interior is just not on the level. So they don't end up balanced enough for me. What do you think?
I'm agreeing with you on the Vikings. You have a Marcus Davenport, and then you have a Daniel Hunter, and then it ends there. Like you said, Tyrese Tonga, whatever, Dean Lowry, whatever. I'm not going to write home about that. For me, where I end up going Lions over Packers, it's hard to take this out because it's how much of it is the coaching, right? How much
Right.
did the coaching staff get out of that Lions team, and how much did the Packers coaching staff pull down that talent that you're talking about with the Packers? But there's still enough talent for me on the Lions out of Aiden Hutchinson. I love a Josh Pascal. Like, I think he's going to be awesome. He just needed some time because he had an injury. Romeo Cora is a guy that really could step up. Then you have an Isaiah Buggs and a John Kaminsky. You're not really looking too much there, but
Right.
it's just they just play the game the right way in that system, and they have enough talent that for me they end up being my number one versus a team like
Do
the
it.
Packers. It's like for me, the Packers are they're that high school player, basketball player who is, number one recruit in the state of Illinois and supposed to do all this stuff. And then like they get to college and it's like, what happened to you? Like, why aren't you doing more? It's, you're just poking at them, like hoping that they finally like step up and use the talent they have. Because you're right, Kenny Clark is a beast. Preston Smith is really talented. Devontae Wyatt, I got to talk to him at the combine when he came out. Super awesome dude, and also just a good player. And then you add a Lucas Van Ness, a Carl Brooks, right, was mocked to the Bears in pretty much every other mock draft this last draft season. But at the end of the day, it's like, what are they? Can they use that talent? And so far, the answer has been no. I wouldn't be surprised if this changes, though. We do this again in week 3, and I'm just like, yeah, what was I talking about? That this team is just loaded on the defensive line.
They're juiced. That's what makes things so complicated. Is you're asking about 3-year outlook, and it's like the now for the Packers and the future for the Packers is crazy. It's the fact that the Lions, to me, they needed that Jalen Carter pick. Now, 8 teams passed on Jalen Carter, including a couple teams passing on him twice. So I doubt he's even the player in the locker room that we wanted him to be. Can we say that, right, Mason? Where it's like, I think we all wanted to believe in Jalen Carter not being viewed as a potential problem, because who wants to think of a human being that way, right? But
Correct.
if
Yep.
that interior, if they had gotten a player like that, would have been nightmare material. I am frankly glad that we have to deal with Jahmyr Gibbs over like having to deal with somebody like that. Are you ready for quarterback?
This is where I'm not gonna lie. Right away, I'm diving right into it. I'm very much drinking the Kool-Aid. You can say all you want to. I'm gonna start at the top. I'm putting Justin Fields there.
Do it. Do it.
And I'm just gonna do it as a whole again. He, like you said, he has proven that he needs to throw with anticipation. Capital A anticipation, as QB school, what JT O'Sullivan would say. But he's got the setup around him. And again, we're talking 3 years. I have nothing to show me Jordan Love is any good. Everything I've seen is yeah. And I know you're watching a lot of film on him, so I'll be interested to see what you say on this. And then Kirk Cousins is the mediocrity at its best. You're not gonna be bad enough to get another quarterback. You're not gonna be good enough to win it all, especially with all the weapons that he has. He's just been throwing it away and can't play in prime time for some reason. Makes no sense to me. And I'm not even sure he's going to be here for the Vikings next year or even the year after that because of all of those things. And then Jared Goff, as much as I want to not like him and want to say that he sucks and all of that jazz, he's been proving that he's the guy with the Lions, right? I mean, they could have gone out and gotten a quarterback with one of their picks. They chose not to. They opted to instead bring in Hendon Hooker, who is, let's be real, like with his age and his ACL tear, it's a hey, maybe if we need you down the line kind of thing, but it's clearly not a we need to replace Jared Goff. And the Lions have playoff, if not Super Bowl aspirations. That's where their mentality is at. So they clearly believe in him. I can't say that I know the Packers believe in Jordan Love. They gave him a 1-year extension, and I don't know that Jordan Love believes in Jordan Love. So for me, clearly Poles is buying in on Justin and saying, hey, we believe in you. If Poles is going to believe in him, I'm going to believe in him. And I already talked about the floor of the running. If you can throw just a little bit of passing in there, give me a couple, give me some more yards in the passing game. Give me some anticipation. We're off and running.
Okay. So I'll play the other side because I'm so happy that you made the really positive argument. I think that there are a lot of sides to this. First of all, I'm going to put Jordan Love in the 4th because to me, the scariest part about Jordan Love, if I'm a Packers fan, I don't want to spoil too much of what I'm going to talk about. Jordan Love is not that bad, but he's inconsistent. So when he's going to play with a bunch of rookies, I don't think that they're going to suck. Like Jordan Love can flick his wrist and put the ball 40 yards down the field in a perfect spot sometimes. And the other times are trouble, right? And so, like, I could tell you, Mason, that in his day and age while he was here, Mitch could not throw downfield with accuracy. If he threw it downfield with accuracy, he did it on accident, right? Whereas with Love, it's a little bit more of a coin flip. Does that make sense? Where it's like he can do a lot of things and he will therefore try a lot of things because he can do them. He just can't guarantee he can do them. And so I wonder if the Packers are going to end up in quarterback purgatory. Anyways, moving on. Kirk Cousins is on a 1-year deal and he's 35 years old. And I don't know how the Vikings are going to put themselves in position to improve at their quarterback position because I know we ranked them really low in a lot of these positional rankings. They're good enough at a lot of the right positions to win some solid games. Now, who knows, Mason, maybe things swing back. The Vikings lose 12 games. And so they end up able to pick a quarterback next year. Maybe, but I'll believe that when I see it. They look to me like a 7-win team, and then the Bears, I want to agree with you. I want to be there. The Bears have invested, Mason, in their quarterback. I don't know if they have invested in Fields specifically because they haven't put the money into Justin Fields. They didn't go out and absolutely hammer that they were picking up their 5th-year option. They've got 2 first-round picks next year. Their defensive line looks as poor as it does. it's set up for a rookie to take over. But of course, they believe in Justin Fields now. I believe in Justin Fields now. I just think Jared Goff puts the Lions in a really strong position that, hey, I'll say it out loud, Mason. If I put Justin Fields at first on my list, the Bears are going to blow it. I've been here. I have to hedge. Like, if I say Fields is the dude too many times, especially publicly, it's going to blow up in my face because it's been my whole life. I am scarred from Cutler absolutely being the guy and Mitch absolutely being the guy. And oh my gosh, Nick Foles was going to win games for us. Technically, he did, but that's neither here nor there. Like, it's.
Run to the L, Anthony Miller. Run to the L.
I believe in Justin Fields. Jared Goff has gone to a Super Bowl and he's 29 years old. He's he's got a year of experience in the offense. And if they don't like him, they can move on. I hate the Hooker pick. Oh, I want to put him at number 2 for the Hooker pick alone, Mason, but that would put Justin Fields at number 1. And again, if I do that, he's going to fail. Like, I am protecting all of us from Chicago by just letting my scars like out into the open and saying, like, I need Justin Fields to stay underrated, because the moment I rate him, I'm gonna end up on freezing cold takes. Like, I would rather end up on freezing cold takes because I was too low on him. I would rather that happen. That's fine. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And it's hard because as I was doing this, and I was doing the quarterback room especially, and I did it last because I wanted to just kind of feel the lay of the land, and I was worried I would put Justin at number 1, and I did that anyway.
Yep.
And I don't want to be drinking the Bears Kool-Aid, and it's hard because
it's so hard.
you just look at and I think this is a perfect example as a wrap up to what we're talking about here. Look across what we have here. If you're watching if you're watching this live, again, if you're listening to the podcast, check it out. I'll post it on Twitter probably on Friday morning. But some of these spots where you want the Bears to be good are good. The wide receiver, tight end, higher than it would have been in past years. Not saying a lot because the NFC North is a little weak there, but it's more than it was, right? I mean, your offensive line, not the best, but it's not last. You have that, and you still have a really solid defense that's going to be helping you out. It's as a whole, the Bears are better off than you might think they are, but there is a bit of a reality check where it's like, look, there's still work to be done. And specifically when it comes to the quarterback, the proof is in the pudding. We got to see what he ends up doing with these new things around him. And you're absolutely right. One of the things I talked about with what Poles did was he made an off-ramp. So just in case Justin's not the guy, you have 2 first-round picks. You can combine those and move up and start over if you need to. However, just based on what we saw last year, based on when we look at the advanced metrics, if anyone hasn't looked at it, Jonathan Wood did a great series on Justin and the offensive line and the receivers and all the deep analytics. Man, he was set up to fail, and that's putting it lightly. So, to give him a chance this year, it's going to be something that's really interesting to see.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, the Bears did this to themselves. Like, the only reason Justin's at 2 and not at 1 is because we were shielded from seeing anything good from Fields last year to a large extent. And so that's fine. I mean, it's complicated, Mason, because I think the Bears have, if we're talking potential rankings, the Bears have the highest potential quarterback in the NFL, or not, in the NFC North right now. If we're talking actual output, it depends. Are we talking about the Justin Fields from week 1 to week 4 that was late on everything, but still wanted to pass the ball and therefore led to some of the most inefficient offensive performances of the year? Well, or are we talking about the hurt Justin Fields at the end of the year? Or are we talking about superstar Justin Fields in the middle third of the year? Which one's which, right? I mean, you tell me, Mason. This is, again, asking your professional opinion. Justin Fields, as big as he is, and as much as he clearly wants to run, and as much contact as he seems to take on throughout the course of a standard NFL game, realistically, what chance do you think he has of finishing the season relatively healthy?
I think I would say it's a fairly high percent chance, actually. And
good.
When you look at it, it's football, right? People get hurt. Look at Patrick Mahomes. He last year, 2 years ago, his offensive line was horrendous, especially in the playoffs when everyone got hurt. But last year they revamped it, good offensive line, and he still got hurt, right? It's football. It's going to happen. So to put that on a single player is too much. That being said, if you can reduce the number of runs that he has to take, right, with because your line is better, because your wide receivers actually get open. I think Robert Mays brought up a really good point on the Athletic Football Show sometime this week. I couldn't remember which episode it was, but it was a conversation of, do you have that guy? How many routes get open in under 2.5 seconds? And like the Bears are bottom of the league in that, and hopefully DJ Moore is that easy button where he actually can beat his man, because they can actually beat man because no Bears last year receivers could do
I hope
anything
so.
against man. And so with that, he has a very high chance of finishing the season healthy, especially because I know the team that is behind him outside of the locker room, outside of the training room, definitely is doing the right things to keep him healthy. So with all of that wrapped up, he should be able to do a lot better. I know he still wants to be able to contribute with his legs, and obviously there's the rushing titles always there, kind of looking at you and saying like, "Ooh, it'd be cool if he could get it." But he knows that he needs to throw the ball to win games.
I mean, it seemed like he wanted to, just looking at the film. I mean, there are a bunch of plays that I'll probably try to put on Twitter here in the next couple days about like where you can see Fields look at his first read, not like what his first read did, look at his second read, not like what they're doing either, and therefore he took off. That you're hoping he stays in the pocket. But I'll tell you what, Mason, if there are two questions. Obviously, there's the question of can you play on time? Right? Yes, we would love anticipation. We would also love not late. I say that with all love in my heart, right? But a second question is how much of this season sticks with him? Like, it's
Hmm.
good that he's outrageously athletic. It's almost a problem how much he realized that he can run around guys, because I'll tell you, Jordan Love is going to learn really quickly that he's better off hanging in the pocket than he is trying to scramble, because defensive ends will catch him. Fields, that's not the case. Fields actually, I mean, like Fields at this point is breaking ankles of everybody from defensive backs to defensive ends, and he's shrugging off tackles from everybody from defensive backs to defensive ends. That is, I mean, you tell me, Mason, you've played a football video game before. As soon as you realize you're untackleable, you just stop throwing the ball. Like, and so I hope, and I imagine this is the case. He's a quarterback. He knows he's a quarterback. He played at Ohio State where he threw the ball an awful lot. But I hope that he doesn't have in the back of his head now that he's better off hanging on to the football, because I do feel like that would lead him back to a poor feedback loop, you know?
Well, we've all seen that. I mean, I remember, I was at undergrad at Trinity College and we had flag football, played at 8 p.m. on our turf fields. And, I very quickly realized I was playing quarterback, and I very quickly realized I was not getting a lot of help from my wide receivers. And you know what was easy? Just to sit there, let the rush come. And when the rush comes, you're allowed to run. And then I would just take off. And then we won the championship that way. I tried to pass it as
Kill
often
me.
as I could. But at the same time, it's like, why am I going to just chuck this ball up for it to get dropped, for it to get intercepted, for blah blah, when I can just go? So I hear you're absolutely right. When that opportunity is sitting there staring at you in the face, can you turn that down knowing that you could run for maybe 40 yards, or you can get tackled and destroy your AC joint, or you could take the 5-yard check down. Now it's 2nd and 5. Live to fight another day. Can he do that?
Well, and Mason, everybody loves making it that black and white. It's not that black and
It is
white.
not.
Like, the scarier part is, okay, so at 1 1/4 sec, or not 1 1/4, it'd be like 1 3/4 seconds, you've got a 50-50 ball to Darnell Mooney. It shouldn't be a 50-50 ball, but he's only got about a half foot separation on him. So by the time you throw this football, you have no idea if Darnell's actually going to be able to bring this in. You hope so, but you don't know. So then you move on to your second read, and he's not 100% throw either, right? DJ Moore's a half second late on his break. So you think he'll be there, but you can't say for certain, right? And then maybe you even think about the check down, and he's got a linebacker in the area code, just makes it not a guaranteed 5 yards. Well, doggone it. I cannot throw the ball, and I could probably pick up 12 myself. So, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are a bunch of plays. I always like to use Nick Foles as an example. Nick Foles couldn't run. So he would just make the best decision possible with his arm, because there was no other choice. Like, he couldn't run the football. He could barely extend the play. So you better believe that ball was coming out on time, because if it was late, it was on him. With Fields, there's a reason you see the football tardiness, right? It's because he doesn't have to throw it, and he's still one of the most dangerous football players in the NFL. Like, it's messy, but it's like a weird messy, you know, because it's messy because you're doing so much wrong. It's messy because you're the only player in the sport that can feasibly carry the ball for a touchdown from 55 yards out. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else is doing that.
Last question before we get out of here. Looking at these positions we have sitting up here, which one do you look at and say, I need this one to change? This one needs to improve. You need to move from 2-1, 3-1, 4-1, whatever. Which one do you need to see take the biggest jump by week 6 when you reassess this?
Cheap shot is the Bears. Move from 2-1. Be the best quarterback in the NFC. If you're not better than Jared Goff by week 6, we might have an issue. And you can love Goff all you want. Justin Fields wins a tie off youth. The other one that I want to see change is I want to see the DBs overtake. Overtake Green Bay. You may not be the best DBs in the division, but if you can come out of this season with the Bears quarterback having proved himself and the DBs having asserted themselves, like, yeah, the offensive line is great, but the Bears should keep adding there. They don't have to be done this year, right? But the DB room doesn't need extra investment if it's good. And I would love for that to be the case. Quarterback's the obvious choice. What about you?
Mine, I mean, I would love to see the D line be better, but that's just really not going to happen. I mean, it is what it is.
Exactly.
For me, it's the offensive line. If I think you can get to that week 6 part and you're like, I'm confident in at least 3 of my starters now, because right now it's pretty much very little. I'm not confident in really any of them, and for a variety of reasons. But if you can get to that week 6, week 7, be like, okay, I'm sold that Darnell Wright is gonna continue to progress and be a guy. I'm happy with where Tevin Jenkins is, and he stayed healthy. And then Nate Davis, if he ever shows up, that he is worth the money that you paid him, and that middle is solidified, and you have, Braxton Joe. If you can leave 3 to 4 of those guys as thumbs up, great, we're making the right choices here. That's should then secondarily, I'm kind of cheating here, help Justin move from 2-1.
There you go. See, you squeezed it in.
Yeah, I had to. But that's all we have here. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining me today. Pinch hitting for Danny Meehan. It was awesome to have you on. Where can people find you, and what projects do you have coming out soon?
Find me on Windy City Gridiron and Twitter at Robert K. Schmitz, and then on YouTube at Second City Gridiron, where I'm going to get a couple of the draft breakdowns that I put on Twitter amalgamated into little videos. So Gravon Dexter should be coming up. We're going to try to get something on the channel every Monday. And then I just finished recording a bunch of all the Love film. So now I'm going to cut it up, write a script, make all that, and we'll talk a little bit about the Packers quarterback situation, which is really fun to talk about in this case because it's so weird. But that should be fun, plus a bunch of other analysis projects throughout the offseason. Thanks so much, Mason.
Yeah, for sure. All right, everyone, bear the hell down.
Bear down.